Hello again, this is James, Darthcephalus on the Saber forums. I'm back with another tutorial on some of the more elaborate flourishes out there. The name of this tutorial is using the Force, which is partially a pun. Not the Force as in the Star Wars canon Force, but the Force as in the physical force. Now, some of what we're going to talk about here is a little bit counterintuitive to Saber people. If you're viewing your saber as a weapon or an extension of your arm, you have to completely change the way that you think. In order to do these flourishes, you have to realize the saber is not an extension of your arm. It's not a part of you. If you let go of it, it will do its own thing. And learning these flourishes is learning how to integrate yourself into what your saber does when you let go of it. Learning to move with it rather than learning to make it move. As a brief illustration, a simple juggling sphere here. A lot of this comes down to minimizing motion, to realizing what it does. With this sphere, if I leave it sitting in my hand, it sits there. If I want to put it on the back of my hand, I have to move my hand a little bit so that it sits there. If I throw it up in the air, it falls. It's on me to move my hand to catch it on the other side. And once you've figured out how to throw and catch, then you can figure out things like how do you make it look a little bit better. Alright, so that's the juggling sphere, but the same thing applies to the saber. The first step is figuring out what does this thing do when I'm not holding it. And part of that is learning to get used to your saber. It's a lot more complicated than a sphere. It has a point of balance, and you should find a saber where the point of balance is somewhere where that you can actually manipulate. If it's up here on the blade, not going to work. If it's back here on the handle, going to be very difficult. With mine, it's right here around the choke, so about where you'd want it. With the Ultra Sabers, they're very customizable. If I wanted to, I could take half a roll of quarters and put it in here. I could use a smaller pommel, larger pommel, more claws, fewer claws, heavier blade. But it's getting the saber to a point where your point of balance is somewhere workable. Now, if you throw it back and forth between your hands, you'll sort of find your point of balance. If I try to throw it too high, it flops. If I try to throw it too low, it spins out of control. The point of balance is the point of comfort, and we're going to need to know where that is. So the first thing to do when you're learning to do this is when you're learning these moves, is learning to let go of the saber. If you're not comfortable with that, if you don't know the balance, you'll go to do one of these flourishes, you'll feel it spinning, and you'll try to catch it before it's ready. And you're going to end up fumbling and dropping it. The idea here is to know where it's going to go if I drop it and put my hand there to catch it at the appropriate place. And the later flourishes will be looking at that sort of behavior. For right now, learn what it does. Just take a little bit of time with your saber to toss it around, spin it a little bit, maybe rotate your hand. But see how it spins, how it waits, how it moves from one hand to the other. You need to know your saber and have a pretty good idea of what it's going to do when you let go of it if you're going to catch it. If you wanted to get into a little bit more of the advanced stuff later on, it's also in your best interests to know how I can influence the saber while it moves. Try grabbing it without really grabbing it. Leave your thumb off, just gripped with the fingers lightly, and see how little you can actually hold on to your saber while still being able to swing it, and how much you can swing it without having to grip with your thumb. And your thumb is there, so if you feel like you're going to drop it, it's an expensive piece of electronics, certainly grab it. It's a safety, but eventually you'll get a pretty good feel for what you can and can't do to it while holding it. And you can try to pass it back and forth, still keeping your thumb out. But just get used to the saber, and in later techniques we'll get a little bit more detailed as to what you can do with that, how you can spin them, flip them, and the minimizing motion will come in when we learn that some of the fancier looking moves are actually not as hard to do as some of the less fancy looking moves. So more on that later in future episodes, so I'll see you on the forums. Until then.